A starving 9-year-old girl approaches a billionaire in a wheelchair and says, "Trade your leftovers for a miracle." He laughs until that tiny trade unlocks something no doctor ever could. What happened next shocked the world and changed both their lives forever. Welcome to Brainfuel, the channel where true stories ignite your mind and touch your heart. Today, we bring you a powerful journey of pain, hope, and healing. A poor little girl with nothing but kindness and a billionaire trapped in silence. Their one moment together sparked a global movement. Let's dive in. It was one of those cold, gray Tuesdays in New York City where the rain doesn't fall, it sticks. The kind of day where the wind slices through your jacket and puddles form little rivers along the cracked sidewalks. People hurried by with umbrellas and coffee, too busy with their lives to notice anything that wasn't glowing on their phones. But there, just outside the glowing windows of Maison Leclerc, a luxury French restaurant known for serving the city's elite, stood Zariah, barefoot, soaked to the skin, and absolutely still. She wasn't begging. She wasn't panhandling. She just stood there, eyes wide, arms wrapped around her tiny body like she was holding a secret too big for a frame. Inside, surrounded by candles, velvet drapes, and the smell of lobster bisque, Howard Bentley was finishing his meal. 64 years old, dressed in a custom-made suit despite being in a motorized wheelchair, he looked like a man who had everything. And he did. Howard was the founder of a billion-dollar tech company. Once known for his aggressive business moves and bold investments, he now lived a much quieter life. 5 years earlier, he'd been in a car crash that shattered his spine, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. He could still speak, blink, and move his mouth, but that was about it. His team handled everything else: feeding, dressing, grooming. Some days, he didn't feel like a man anymore, just a mind trapped in a very expensive cage. His staff was helping him out of the restaurant when it happened. That's when Zariah stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just looked up at the older man being wheeled down the ramp and asked in the most gentle, almost angelic voice, "Sir, will you trade your leftovers for a miracle?" It was so unexpected that Howard thought he'd misheard her. The guards moved in fast. "Back up, kid," one of them barked. But Howard raised his finger, barely moving it, and they paused. He looked at her, squinting through the rain. She couldn't have been more than 9. Her hair was drenched and clinging to her cheeks. Her shoes, if she had any, were long gone. Her tiny hands were trembling, but her eyes were steady. "Did you say trade leftovers for a miracle?" he asked, incredulous. She nodded. "Yes, sir. Your food. For something even better." Howard blinked. Was this a prank? Some kind of stunt? "What kind of miracle could you possibly give me?" he asked, his voice dry with sarcasm. A weak chuckle escaped him. Not mean-spirited, just tired. He'd heard every miracle pitch before. Magic oils, spiritual healers, illegal stem cell treatments. All of it. None of it worked. But something about this little girl, her words didn't sound like a sales pitch. They sounded real, like she meant every syllable. "I'm not asking for money," she added quickly, as if reading his thoughts. "I'm just hungry, but I don't want to just take. I want to give too." Now Howard was intrigued. "All right," he said, his voice slow and measured. "Trade accepted. You give me your miracle. I'll give you my leftovers." He nodded toward his assistant, who handed over a white takeout box filled with untouched filet mignon, roasted duck, and truffle potatoes. It was enough to feed 3 people. Easy. Zariah took it gently, her hands shivering from cold and excitement. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, wrinkled, hand-drawn card. It looked like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The edges were torn, the colors faded. She held it out. Howard squinted. The writing was uneven, clearly written in crayon. But the words were bold. "You are not broken. Your heart still works." He stared at it, then at her. Back to the card. "That's it?" he asked. Zariah nodded proudly. "My mom made it when she had cancer. She said it helped her fight every day. She said it was her miracle. And before she passed, she told me to give it to someone who needed it more than we did." The silence between them stretched long. Howard didn't know what to say. No one had ever given him something like this. He'd been given stock options, golden watches, plaques, awards, but never something this simple. This pure. Zariah took a step back. "Thank you for the food," she whispered, then turned and disappeared into the crowd, cradling the takeout box like treasure. Howard just sat there in his wheelchair, staring at the car in his lap. A single raindrop hit the glass window behind him, and something shifted inside his chest. He didn't know it yet, but in that moment, everything was about to change. Howard Bentley's laugh wasn't loud. It didn't roll across the street or echo off the buildings. But it cut. It cut because it wasn't just laughter, it was disbelief. It was a man chuckling, not at cruelty, but the absurdity of hope showing up in the form of a drenched, barefoot little girl offering a miracle in exchange for his leftovers. He hadn't laughed like that in years. Not since the day he was wheeled into the hospital, unable to feel anything below his neck. Not since the day he realized no doctor, no surgeon, no amount of money could fix the severed nerves in his spine. So yes, he laughed, because a kid with mud on her cheeks and trembling hands had just handed him a crumpled, hand-drawn card and called it a miracle. He stared at it, even as the laughter faded. "You are not broken. Your heart still works." The words were awkwardly written in faded purple crayon. Childish handwriting. Uneven letters. But every stroke seemed alive. It wasn't just a card. It was a memory. A moment. A message. Howard didn't say anything on the ride back to his penthouse. The usual chatter from his assistants died down quickly as they noticed him staring out the window, the card still in his lap. He didn't check his phone. He didn't answer emails. He just looked down at that wrinkled miracle. And when he got home, he didn't throw it away like he normally did with fan mail or charity requests. He asked his housekeeper to dry it and place it in the glass display case where he kept some of his most prized possessions, right next to his Tech Industry Hall of Fame plaque and a signed photo with a former U.S. president. But even as he looked at it inside that glass frame, he scoffed a little under his breath. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "A miracle from a kid." Yet something inside him wasn't scoffing. It was stirring. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because of pain. He couldn't feel anything, after all, but because of noise. Mental noise. His mind kept going back to that little girl's voice, to the steadiness in her tone, to the fact that she didn't ask for money or toys or attention. She asked for food and gave something back. Who even does that anymore? He thought of all the people who had come to him after his accident. Specialists, alternative healers, expensive gurus claiming they could restore him. They all wanted something. Zariah didn't. She wanted to give. He remembered how she looked him in the eye, fearless, not impressed by his expensive wheelchair, not intimidated by the bodyguards. She had something to say, and she said it. By 3 a.m., he was still wide awake. The nurses who stayed overnight at his apartment noticed something was off. "Sir, should we call Dr. Lansing?" one of them asked softly. "No," Howard replied. "I don't need a doctor." He paused. "I need to know who that little girl was." The nurse blinked, confused. "Little girl? The one outside the restaurant," he said. "The one who gave me this." He tilted his head toward the card framed in glass. The nurse walked over and read it aloud, a little awkwardly. "You are not broken. Your heart still works." "Sir, what is this?" Howard stared at the ceiling. "A challenge, I think." The next morning, Howard's assistant, Roger, came in as usual, tablet in hand, schedule loaded, voice brisk. But Howard interrupted him with a single request. "Find her." Roger raised an eyebrow. "Sir, the girl. From last night. Outside Maison Leclerc. I want to know who she is, where she lives, and why she gave me that card." "Sir, do you mean the street kid?" Howard turned his head sharply. "Don't call her that." There was weight in his voice. Enough that Roger nodded without another word. By noon, they had tracked her down. Zariah James, age 9, living in an old building in the South Bronx with her maternal grandmother, Miss Clara James, aged 65. Her mother had passed away from breast cancer just 8 months prior. Her father? No one knew. He disappeared years ago. They were behind on rent, living off canned food and SNAP assistance. No working heater in the winter. No internet. No medical insurance. When Howard's assistant showed him the full report, he sat quietly for a moment, letting the silence thicken. Then, Almost under his breath, he whispered, "She gave me everything she had. Not money, not food, not medicine. Belief." Zariah gave him belief when everyone else offered pity. And that was the moment the real miracle began. Not in Howard's body, but in his heart. Because for the first time since his accident, he felt seen. Not as the rich man in the chair. Not as the tech genius or the tragic figure. Just human. And suddenly, that laugh he had let out yesterday didn't feel right anymore. It echoed back to him now, not as amusement, but as a question. What if it wasn't a joke at all? Howard Bentley sat at his penthouse window, the skyline of New York stretching out before him like a cold, distant painting. But he wasn't looking at the city. His eyes were locked on a wrinkled piece of paper sealed inside a glass frame. The card. "You're not broken. Your heart still works." He'd read it maybe 50 times already, and still, every word felt like a quiet explosion inside his chest. He had held billion-dollar contracts in his hands, signed deals that shifted industries, held letters from presidents, CEOs, and investors. But none of them had ever hit him like that card did. There was no gold on it, no brand name, just crayon, purple, a little shaky, written by a girl who lived in a crumbling apartment and had nothing but hope to trade. Howard couldn't stop thinking about Zariah. That moment in the rain, the clarity in her eyes, the way she didn't flinch or falter when she offered him the card, as if she already knew what it would mean to him, as if she believed something about him that he had long forgotten. He had been paralyzed for 5 years. 5 years of physical therapy, silent frustration, and pretending to be okay in front of cameras and staff. People treated him like a hero for holding on, for being strong. But Howard knew the truth. He wasn't strong. He was surviving, numbly, wealthy and well-fed, but empty inside. That's why her words kept echoing. "You're not broken." 2 days later, Howard decided he couldn't just sit in silence anymore. He asked Roger, his assistant, to arrange a private visit to the Bronx apartment listed in Zariah's file. "No cameras," he said. "No security detail. Just me." Roger hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, that part of town isn't." Howard cut him off. "She walked through the rain barefoot to find me. I can meet her where she lives." The van pulled into the neighborhood quietly. Rundown buildings, cracked sidewalks, laundry lines flapping from fire escapes. The kind of place no billionaire ever visits, unless it's in a charity photo op. Inside a third-floor apartment with peeling wallpaper and a broken ceiling fan, Zariah and her grandmother were just finishing lunch. A bowl of rice and beans. That's all they had. When the knock came, Miss Clara opened the door slowly, surprised to see a sharply dressed man in a motorized wheelchair outside her apartment. No cameras, no staff. Just Howard Bentley and a strange kind of softness in his eyes. Zariah stepped out from behind her grandmother. Her expression didn't change. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't scared. She simply smiled. "You came," she said calmly. "I did," Howard replied, smiling back. "Because I owe you something." Miss Clara quickly invited him in, and they made room as best they could. Howard's chair barely fit through the doorway, and the floor creaked beneath him. There was no luxury here, just warmth. And that's what struck him the most. He looked around. No TV, no expensive furniture. A few family photos on the wall. Zariah's drawings taped to the fridge. In one, a stick-figure man in a wheelchair was holding hands with a little girl next to a giant, glowing heart. Howard's throat tightened. "I came to ask you something," he said gently, turning towards Zariah. "Why did you give me that card?" Zariah blinked. "Because I saw you." Howard raised an eyebrow. "You saw me?" "Yeah," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Most people walk by me like I'm invisible. But I saw you. You looked sad, even though you were wearing fancy clothes. You looked like someone who forgot they're alive." Howard swallowed hard. "That's a very grown-up thing to say. My mama used to say it all the time. After her chemo, she'd be so weak, but she'd say, 'As long as my heart still works, I'm not done.' So when I saw you, I thought, maybe you needed to hear that too." Her words were like medicine, and Howard felt them settling into all the places that had gone numb over the years. Miss Clara added, "My daughter believed in healing hearts more than healing bodies." She passed that belief to this little one. Howard turned to Zariah again. You gave me something no one else has in 5 years. What's that? She asked. He smiled. You made me feel like a person again. From that moment on, Howard's visits became regular. He'd roll into that cramped apartment every Sunday, bringing food, books, and something he hadn't brought to anyone in years, his time. He didn't talk like a billionaire. He listened like a friend. And in return, Zariah gave him more cards. Each one different. It's not over just because it hurts. You're allowed to cry and fight. Your heart speaks louder than your body. She drew them by hand, decorated them with stickers and colored stars. He kept every single one. Howard's staff noticed the change. He smiled more, laughed louder, asked about people, not projects. The man who once buried himself in tech and silence now looked forward to Sundays with a girl who had nothing to give, except everything that mattered. And that wrinkled card in the glass case? It never stopped speaking. Even in its silence, it shouted one simple truth Howard now lived by. You're not broken, and you never were. It began as a simple trade, a leftover meal for a crumpled card. But no one, not Zariah, not Howard Bentley, not even the doctors, could have predicted how deeply that trade would ripple through both of their lives. After his first visit to the Bronx apartment, Howard became a different man. The billionaire who once lived sealed behind glass, physically trapped, emotionally distant, was now opening his heart one Sunday at a time. He'd arrive in his van with fresh groceries, books, and stories about his youth. Zariah would meet him at the door with a smile and new drawings, messages of encouragement that she colored by hand with the few crayons she owned. And each time, he felt lighter. Lighter not because of some cure, but because for the first time since his accident, he mattered. Not for his money, not for his name, just because he was Howard, a man whose heart still worked. One afternoon, as Howard sat in their tiny living room sipping tea through a special assisted straw device, he looked at Zariah and asked something that had been sitting on his mind. Do you still believe miracles happen? Zariah nodded instantly. I see them every day. Howard smiled faintly. I haven't seen one in a while. Zariah tilted her head. You already did. You just didn't recognize it. He raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? What was it? She grinned. You showed up. Howard didn't say a word. His eyes just welled with quiet tears. He hadn't been seen like this in years, maybe ever. No media, no investors, no expectations. Just a girl who believed in him even before he believed in himself. That moment sparked something more. Howard had spent a lifetime creating software, systems, and solutions for others. But now, he wanted to build something from the heart. He called a meeting with his legal team and said 5 words that left them stunned. I want to build hope. Hope, sir, one of them repeated. Yes, Howard replied firmly. Something real. Something like that little girl gave me. A place where people trade pain for possibility. Fear for healing. Darkness for light. He paused, then added, let's call it the Miracle Exchange. Within weeks, Howard began pouring resources into the project. He didn't want another lifeless nonprofit. He wanted a movement. The Miracle Exchange would be both physical and digital, a network of centers where people could come, share their stories, receive emotional support, and even trade hand-drawn miracle cards filled with messages of strength, just like the one Zariah gave him. Each card would be written by someone who had endured pain, grief, illness, poverty, depression, and would be passed on to someone facing a similar struggle. One person's survival would become another's lifeline. Sometimes, all it takes is knowing you're not alone, Howard said in the launch video. But the real miracle? It hadn't even started yet. About 6 months after the restaurant encounter, during a routine occupational therapy session, Howard felt something unusual. It was a tingle, a faint twitch in the tip of his right index finger. He stared at his hand for a full minute. Then he looked at the therapist. Did you see that? She nodded slowly. Do it again. He concentrated hard, and the finger twitched again. Slight, shaky but real. The room fell silent. The therapist grabbed her tablet and began documenting immediately. Howard's breathing quickened. This wasn't supposed to happen. Doctors had declared his spinal damage permanent. Every test confirmed full paralysis from the neck down. Any movement now was impossible, and yet it was happening. A full medical evaluation followed, and the verdict shocked everyone. Nerve activity had returned to the top of Howard's spine. It's extremely rare, the neurologist said. Honestly, we can't explain it. Nothing in your treatment has changed recently. But something's happening. Something we've never seen in a case this severe. Howard didn't flinch. He just looked at the old card in his hand, the original miracle Zariah gave him, and whispered, "Maybe it's not supposed to be explained." In the following months, Howard dedicated himself to intensive therapy. It was grueling, painful, exhausting, but for the first time in 5 years, he could feel pain, and that alone was a gift. He regained limited movement in both arms, enough to feed himself with assistance, enough to steer his own wheelchair for short distances, enough to write his name again. Every milestone he shared with Zariah, and every time she handed him a new miracle card. You're not just healing, you're proving it's possible. Movement is a bonus. Hope is the real victory. You traded leftovers for a future. Howard framed them all. The media finally caught wind of the story, but Howard refused interviews until one day he appeared with Zariah on a live stream for the Miracle Exchange. He didn't talk about himself. He didn't talk about the money. He looked directly into the camera and said, "A little girl gave me a miracle for a meal. I gave her leftovers and she gave me back my life. If you're watching this, don't wait for hope. Create it. Trade what you have, even if it's broken, because someone else might turn it into something beautiful." And just like that, the world began to listen. 2 years later, in a packed auditorium filled with some of the most powerful voices in media, business, and global advocacy, Zariah James, now 11 years old, stood center stage, small in size, but commanding in presence. Cameras flashed. Spotlights beamed. People leaned in. To most of the audience, she was just a little girl from the Bronx. But to those who had been following her story, she was more than that. She was the spark. The girl who traded a leftover meal for a miracle. The girl who reminded a paralyzed billionaire that his heart still worked. Now, standing in a crisp white dress with purple stars stitched along the hem. Purple for the crayon color she'd used to write the miracle card. Zariah took a deep breath and spoke. "When I gave that card to Mr. Howard Bentley, I wasn't trying to go viral. I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just hungry, but I didn't want to take something for nothing. My mama taught me, even when you have nothing, you still have something to give, and that something is kindness." I didn't know that a piece of paper could change a man's life, but it did. The audience was silent, hanging on to every word. Howard Bentley sat in the front row, his hands gently trembling in his lap. No longer dependent on a full-time nurse, he now had enough mobility in his upper body to shake hands, write short notes, and his favorite, hug. Zariah turned to look at him. "He told me he felt alive again," she said, her voice soft but steady. "And I told him he always was. He just needed someone to see it." Behind her, a massive screen lit up with images. Howard's framed miracle card. Zariah drawing a new car by candlelight. Volunteers at the Miracle Exchange Centers handing out food, cards, and hugs. A boy in Kenya receiving a card that said, "You're not too broken to be loved." A woman in a cancer ward holding one that read, "You're still more than your illness." What began as a private moment on a rainy street had now grown into a global movement. The Miracle Exchange had opened 137 centers across 18 countries. Tens of thousands of cards have been traded, each written by someone who had endured loss, hardship, trauma, and was now offering strength to someone else. And it wasn't just emotional healing. The centers provided meals, therapy resources, art supplies, mentorship programs, and safe spaces for people to connect. Because that's what Zariah and Howard believed. You don't need to be rich to be generous. And you don't need to be whole to heal someone else. Back on stage, Zariah raised a new card high above her head. It read, "You are not too small to make a big difference." Cheers erupted. Tears flowed freely. Howard rolled onto the stage, slowly, carefully, guiding his own wheelchair without assistance. He took the mic, his voice quiet with emotion. I used to think miracles were things that defied science, he said. Now I know the truth. A miracle is someone showing up when the world has forgotten you. He turned to Zariah. She showed up, with nothing in her pockets, but everything I needed. The applause was thunderous. Later that evening, reporters asked Howard what made this journey different from all the tech empires he'd built in his earlier life. He didn't hesitate. None of those companies changed me, he said. This girl did. Meanwhile, Zariah had become a symbol for something bigger than just one miracle. Schools invited her to speak. Artists created murals of her miracle card. Mental health professionals incorporated the card-writing practice into therapy programs. One therapist from Brazil described it like this. When a child writes a card like Zariah's, they're not just giving hope. They're healing themselves in the process. It creates a cycle of strength. And that's what Howard meant when he said the real miracle had only just begun. In a live interview streamed to over 20 million viewers worldwide, Zariah was asked one simple question. Do you still believe in miracles? She smiled and nodded. I don't just believe in them, she said. I help make them every day. Now, framed beside the original miracle card in Howard's home office, there's a photo of Zariah holding a marker and smiling. Underneath it, engraved in silver, are the words, "Hope didn't knock. It just walked in." And all of it, every tear, every smile, every life touched, began with one soaked, barefoot girl, one forgotten meal, and a crumpled little card that whispered, "Your heart still works.